Is your generation the one that is picking up for where the Panthers left off, saying, all right, enough is enough? The generation before us forgot about the fight. We're picking it back up.
Not only forgot about the fight, forgot about us. Yes, and we're picking it back up. But at this level, all we're trying to do is unite. We killing each other because we killing ourselves. We're not. When another man, I know I've been in a position. It's out of our control. It's not like he wants to kill. He just doesn't want to die. You know what I'm saying? It's that situation when you got. We are living in a war zone. It's not as easy as these people are making us think that.
What's dangerous is when the universe pick you.
I made a metamorphosis. I'm a new person today. Because I used to strongly and honestly, I feel like I could represent my generation so much because I honestly did not care whether I lived or died. But now, I cannot die with people thinking I'm a criminal. I can't leave until this shit straight. You know, I'm not suicidal. I'm not. Okay.
Peace. So first I want to say, I'm definitely not here to disrespect anyone. Especially to separate anyone from their path in any way. But in my pursuit of truth, I wanted to know for myself, and I feel like it's worth sharing. So during this pursuit, this seeking, or whatever we're gonna call it, there would be times when I would be led to, here and there, and I end up at the bookstore and just being there, and then something might resonate. And what ended up resonated once was this book, the raw material. So, in the raw material is a channel text, channeled through, I'll share it, Don Elkins, Carla Rucker, James Allen McCarthy. So, in this book, they ask about OSP. So I don't know what OSP is, but when I find out, I look it up, I start reading it because it's interesting. So then I look at who was the guy who it was channeled through. It's channeled through automatic writing. So it's kind of bugged out because it's like the stuff that's in it, what man could have put it together almost, you think, because you get to certain parts and you go look at this guy's picture again, like, he ain't got no bias, obviously, because why would he put something like this in this book? So, I mean, we can take it as it was a channel book. We can take it as perhaps somebody found some old tablets or something and was able to decipher them. We don't know, but this is what Ra says. And Ra says of itself, it is a social memory complex, and it is an elder family of humanity, and it is the same Ra of Egypt. So I think you should pick this up. If you're interested, I ain't trying to put nothing in your path. You're interested in just other type of information, that's all I'm offering because it helped me out a lot of this stuff. It says, can you tell me who was responsible for transmitting the book OSP? I am Ra. This was transmitted by one of Confederation Social Memory Complex status whose idea, as offered to the council, was to use some of the known physical history of the so-called religions or religious distortions of your cycle in order to veil and partially unveil aspects or primal distortions of the law of one. All names can be taken to be created for their vibrational characteristics. The information buried within has to do with the deeper understanding of love and light and the attempts of infinite intelligence through many messengers to teach, learn those entities of your sphere. Basically, it's saying that this book was put here to show a correct history of the religions and what they were supposed to be, and the teachings of the law of one that has been on this planet for a long, long time. The law of one is the law of unity, the law of oneness, the law of the creator and creation, that we all one. The creator and creation is one. And all of creation is one. The law of one is oneness. So of this book, it says that a sacred history of the dominions of the higher and lower heavens on the earth. So not what we call heavens. Basically like space. And it speaks of atmosphere, and when you come from earth and up in earth atmosphere, within the firmament, that there's a reality that exists there, a spiritual sort of reality. And then beyond the firmament, there's a higher heaven, higher heavens, more we should call it. And a lot of beings never go past that first heaven out of Earth's atmosphere. But it says for the past 24,000 years. Now this book says the Earth goes in cycles of 24,000 years.
Remember that. Remember it. Write it down.
So being from the submersion of the continent of Pan in the ocean, in the Pacific Ocean, commonly called the flood or deluge to this era. So it's speaking of Genesis flood actually being real. So when we go to that part of this, the way it describes it is, all right, so look, in this book, it describes the arc as being this. Now we have 4 seasons, and our 4 seasons is based on us moving around the sun and all of that. So basically it says, hold on, I got you, because I want to get this correct. So it says that the sun with his family move around in a circuit which divide in 1,600 arcs, seasons. So arcs is basically seasons. So the distance of which for each arc is 3,000 years or one cycle. During the cycle, the earth and her heavens fall in Etherian regions of hundreds of Etherian worlds. Etheria is the spiritual world. So when this sun and all of our planets are moving around in space, it's moving through different spiritual regions, whose chiefs have to do with the management of worlds. So at the time of a cycle, the earth is therefore under the control and management of such of the Creator's angels for the resurrection, that is the ascension of man on earth. So, let me go back to here. So basically resurrection and ascension is the same thing. So basically getting man past at least Earth's atmosphere. Because a lot of people who die don't really leave here. Like what the Buddha spoke about, hungry ghosts. People who still have desires here. People who never leave this. And this is why it's more dark now than ever. You know, it's really, really dark because a lot of spirits just not even returning, just not leaving, not even moving past that first heaven, that first, atmosphere, moving on to the bigger spiritual worlds or whatever we'll call them. So, God, you have the creator of all, and in this book they refer to it as Jehovah. Now, it's not Jehovah. The original name humanity gave God that resembled the wind and the ocean. But after a while, it became Jehovah for whatever reason. So that's what it speaks of in this book, and that's the creator of all. Let's just leave it at that. The creator of all. And then God is the sons of the creator of all, just high-raised angels of wisdom and of light. And these are the gods, rulers of the heavens and the earth for a period of time, for the period of those cycles, basically. So when we fall in these spiritual regions, one of the chiefs of one of those gods becomes a god here, gets a chance to become a god here. And through this story, you'll see how a lot of them fell and became our false gods and our false, were the lords, and lords were the chiefs on earth. Basically kind of like God on earth, higher raised angel, wise angel on earth. This is how this book puts it. So now we know what the ark is. We was in the season of no. This is how this book puts it. We were in the season of no. That's what the ark is. So now we understand what we talking about now. The ark of no. The season of no. And so, let me just read this for you. So, it says, But as the light of a full-grown man differeth from that of a child's, so in different degree was the light of men. And those with the higher light were called faithers, because they perceived that wisdom shaped all things and ruled to the ultimate glory of the All One. But those of the lesser light were called Cain, the droop, because their trust was more in the worldly than in the spiritual things. And the faithers were also called the chosen people, because they chose God. They were the chosen people because they chose God. Who was Lord over earth. But the Canaanites, the Droops, were classified as enemies of the Lord because they sacrificed by means of war and death that which the Creator made alive. And these two people have lived on the earth from the first and even to this day. So it says that in this time, the Lord, that is the God over earth, I'm going to keep reminding you, elder brother or sister, put here to help us with our ascension, our resurrection, right? So this is some of the, so during this time in Pan, this is Atlantis, right? We're talking about Atlantis now. It says, I had a remnant of an old race that was the pure race of the chosen, the ones who chose God, the ones who knew God from birth, right? In Pan. So, you know how we talk about some of those wise and high beings. So, also when we talk about Pan or Atlantis, we talk about the technological. So there was a spiritual side and there was a technological side. But here it talks about, it said, I had a remnant of the old race of chosen, and they were scattered far and near and in separate places, hiding away from their evil pursuers. And I had said unto them, every living thing that groweth up out of the ground shall be food for you. But of everything wherein there is the breath of life, which is of blood and spirit, you shall not eat. Who sheddeth blood, wherein is life, who by himself inviteth his own blood and spirit to despoil you. So, live by the sword, die by the sword, more or less. In likeness of God was man made heir of the earth and all things thereon. You see the different language? Ruler, heir. That's a different thing. Ruler and heir. It said, be fruitful and multiply, bring forth abundantly in remembrance of the Lord God of heaven and earth, our elder brother. Because at the time, that was our highest light. We really couldn't, our consciousness has been growing, right? So it said, so throughout the story, this is early in the story, because circumcision is an old thing. It's not an Egyptian thing. It's not an African thing. It's an old thing. And it was a sign, actually, of those who chose to have I don't want to put it as a sacrifice, but right, the female faith is the female chosen, the females that chose God. they went to God and said, hey, well, they prayed and they spoke to the elders and they asked, at the time, they was communicating, they had a higher light, right? The Lord, the elder on earth was there, right? So they asked, what sign can we be given to let us know who is who? Because you got men from other places coming and pretending to be men who chose God, and now we producing babies that is sick and that's warriors basically, Canaanites, Canes, Drooks, the dark warriors type beings, and we need a sign, so the sign of circumcision was given early on through this, and that was passed down from those chosen, those faithers. So it says that, and I gave the circumcision as a measure of the boundary of my chosen. But there were giants, Drooks in those days, and in time after that. And it's crazy that if you look for a minute now, they just been finding giant bones and don't know how to explain them or any reason to explain them. And then, all right, so it says, and my chosen came unto them, and they bore children to them also, and their flesh became corrupt, so that vermin inhabited them from the time of their birth to the time of death. And they became rotten in the head with catarrh, and in the throat with ulcers and running sores, and in the lungs and joints with the poison of death. And their offspring that was born unto them came forth afflicted with the sins of their fathers and mothers, to linger in misery or to die in infancy. And thus they peopled heaven with untimely births and spirits of darkness, who in return came back and re-afflicted mortals. And I said, I will destroy man from the face of the earth, for the flesh of man is corrupt. For by the eating of flesh and unwise cohabitation, by eating meat and by mating in the wrong way, because certain energies just don't mix, and what they create, we have seen the result of more times. It is what it is, though. So he said he had become a corrupted race upon the earth. So he said in this time that most of the earth was dark, and I guess it was coming from that area of Pan. It said, I called unto my chosen, persecuted and hidden away in the valleys and mountains, even on the tops of the mountains, in the land of Pan. And I said unto them, because ye have chosen my commandments, come forth and hear the word of your God. And they came out of their hiding places, thousands and thousands of them, and I sent my angels unto them, saying, this is the word, you have found favor, for ye alone of all that is on the earth have kept my commandments and have seen righteousness in the seed of your generations. Go to therefore and build ships sufficient to my chosen, and get within where none can pursue or destroy you. For behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth, and even above the high mountains. For I will destroy the corruption thereof, and purge it of all uncleanliness. Take ye therefore of all the food that is good, and gather it into the ships, for the flood shall remain 150 days, and you shall not come forth and find wherewith to eat. You won't find nothing to eat. And the angel stood in the ark of Noah 24,000 years before Cosmos, before the Common Era, which is said to have started in 1838. The new era of humanity, allegedly. And that we had one of these new cycles years before Cosmos. And the Lord commanded the chosen to go into the ships, and they went in. And the same day the gates of heaven were open, and the earth rocked to and fro as a ship at sea. And the rains fell in torrents, and loud thunderings came up from beneath the floor of the world, and the sea came up on the land, first upon the valleys, then upon the mountains, so that the ships floated on the waters. But the land was swallowed up, valleys and mountains, and all the living perished, save the Ahims, those of the chosen who floated on the ships. It said, I numbered them, they were saved, and there were 12,420, and these were descendants of the first race of men that walked on 2 feet, descendants of the first human beings. Behold, I will carry them to all the visions of the earth. This is of Atlantis, though, and it says, but this actually got a history of 50,000 years, so we only talking about 24,000 years. We also have the story about Lemuria. And Lemuria, according to Ra, happened about, let's check this out. It says, I was wondering about the civilizations of Atlantis and Lemuria, when these civilizations occurred, and where did they come from? It says they were beings of a somewhat primitive nature, but those who had very advanced spiritual distortions. The civilization was part of this cycle, experienced early within the cycle at a time of approximately 53,000 of your years ago, and it was an helpful and harmless place which was washed beneath the ocean during the readjustment of your spear's tectonic plates through no action of their own. They went out those who survived and reached many places in what you call Russia, North America, and South America. The Indians says they were descendants of these entities. Like the other incarnates of this cycle, they came from elsewhere. But it says most of that race ended, and the survivors of that race basically became the predecessors of us, and then this happened in Atlantis, and we're the generations after that. So before we can even speak on any of the rest of this, we gotta see if there's any sort of type of evidence for Atlantis. That's first of all. And then we gotta see if there's any evidence for a 24,000 year flood or a 24,000 year period of any sort. We gotta see if there's any evidence for that before we can talk about anything else. But there's also something I wanted to speak about too. Because just in case we're wrong about any of this, and we're wrong about the history of all of this and the book and everything, it was something that interests me in Hebrews. So I just want to just speak on this real quick. But this is from the Institute for Scripture Research, and this is the scriptures. So a lot of the words are in Hebrew, so just bear with your homeboy real quick. Truly then, if perfection were through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people were given the Torah, why was there still need for another priest to arise according to the order of Melchizedek? Melchizedek, the king of Salem, the one who spoke to Abraham, who guided Abraham. And it's even said that in another book that in our so-called Bible, that in the times that Abraham was speaking to God, that he was actually speaking to Melchizedek. But we'll have to see what that's about. And not be called according to the order of Aaron. For the priesthood being changed, of necessity there takes place a change of law also. For he of whom this is said belongs to another tribe, from which no one had attended at the slaughter place. For it is perfectly clear that our master arose from Yehuda, a tribe about which Moshe never spoke of concerning priesthood. And this is clearer still if another priest arises in the likeness of Melchizedek, who has become, not according to the Torah of fleshly command, but according to the power of an endless life. For he does witness, you are priests forever according to the order of Melchizedek. For there is indeed a setting aside of the former command, because of its witness and unprofitableness. For the Torah perfected not, but the bringing in of a better expectation, through which we draw near to Elohim. And it was not without an oath, for they indeed became priests without an oath, but he became priest with an oath, by him who said to him, in this book, it's the name for God is the Hebrew letters, and it's not said, and has sworn and shall not regret. It further goes on to say, for the Torah appoints as high priests men who have weakness, but the word of the oath, which came after the Torah, appoints the Son, having been perfected forever. This is Hebrews. It's speaking about the Creator. But then it says this about a new covenant, right? So I'm just saying, if we all wrong about this, even if we wrong, this is the same book. And the same book says that the Torah is obsolete and there's a new covenant. For if that first covenant had been faultless, then no place would have been sought for a second. For finding fault with them, he says, see, the days are coming, says, when I shall conclude with the house of Israel and with the house of Yahoo. Well, it says Yisrael, and with the house of Yehuda, a renewed covenant, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Mitzrayim, that's Egypt, because they did not continue in my covenant, and I disregarded them, says, because this is the covenant that I shall make with the house of Yisrael after those days, says, giving my laws in their mind, and I shall write them on their hearts. And I shall be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. So it says, giving my laws in their minds, and I shall write them on their hearts. So that's what, I got kicked out of church for literally saying that. I went in there and said that. He didn't even give me the chance to quote the scripture or nothing. Because I said, just make sure that you are not just living by the book. The book say, I'm going to put it on your mind, your heart. And a lot of them people looked at me and they understood what I was saying, but he kicked me out. It's cool. It was his house. He reminded me that it wasn't God's house. It was his house. Don't forget that. They come in their own name. And they shall by no means teach each one his neighbor and each one his brother, saying, know the name for God, because they all shall know me, from the least of them to the greatest, because I shall forgive their unrighteousness and their sins and their lawlessness. I shall no longer remember. So even if what we about to get into is wrong and not and not valid, that what they're doing is already not valid and invalidated already within itself. The old commandment and the old covenant, the old Torah is over. It's gone. You see? Got nothing to do with me. I ain't do that. For the Torah, having a shadow of the good matters to come and not the image of itself of the matters, was never able to make perfect those who draw near with the same slaughter offerings, and they offer continually year by year. Otherwise would they not have ceased to be offered, because those who offered once cleansed would have had no more consciousness of sins. But in those offerings is a reminder of sins year by year. For it is impossible for blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. Therefore, coming into the world, he says, slaughtering and meal offerings you did not desire, but a body you have prepared for me. And ascendant offerings and offerings for sin you did not delight. Then I said, see, I come in the roll of the book. It has been written concerning me to do your desire, Elohim. Say, I have come in the form of the book. You don't need the book. I am the word, because this was about Yahshua. This was Hebrews. This was supposed to be like according to Yahshua coming to be the word that Moses spoke. To be that, to show you what Moses was speaking about. Not to even teach you nothing new. He only taught you about two things: forgiveness and healing. And treating your neighbor right, treating each other right. He ain't even teach you nothing crazy. That's the ill thing. He ain't even kind of teach you nothing crazy. He came to be the word. That's why he said, keep the commandments of Moses, but I just came to offer you a couple more. I am the word. I'm just saying according to the book. I'm not saying this is my value system, my belief system, but we just talking about according to the book. If they're gonna teach it, they should teach what it is and what it say, and not make shit up and keep trying to translate something that already say what it say. I think that's weird and silly and stupid, you know. But like I said, before we move on, we gotta establish Atlantis. We gotta establish this 24,000 year cycle thing on Earth and see if this is even real, because we can't even continue to talk about overspeed if they lying, because we not doing no lies. That's why we don't get into the religious books, because half truths ain't cool. If you want to take them as wisdom books, it's okay, but to take them as holy, oh man. So let's just see what's going on.
The story and mythology of Atlantis has been deeply planted in our subconscious mind because, in a way, it was the beginning of our current civilization. People want to know how it started and why.
In 1995, the notion of a lost civilization was not a new idea. That notion has been around for a very long time. We can take that notion actually back thousands and thousands of years. The most famous example is Plato, the Greek philosopher Plato, who gave us the story of Atlantis. From Plato comes the story of Atlantis, a great advanced civilization which had navigating and seafaring skills, which could explore the world, which built gigantic buildings, which had advanced knowledge in every area, which was prosperous and powerful. But then Plato says that corruption crept into this society, that it became cruel and avaricious, it became greedy, it began to impose its power around the world. And he has a very ringing phrase. He said that Atlantis ceased to wear its prosperity with moderation. And the suggestion is that it's this hubris, this conceit of Atlantis, that it had become so sure of itself that somehow the universe struck it down, and we have the cataclysm of flood and disaster, and that Atlantis is submerged beneath the waves. Now, of course, the view of historians and academics is that Plato's story is just made up. He just made it up to make some political or philosophical point. But this cannot be so. That view can't be right. I was very suspicious of that view the first time I heard it from a mainstream historian. Why are they saying that Plato made this up? Plato repeatedly states that it is a true story. And as we look into it further, we find something else, that Plato puts a date on the destruction of Atlantis. He says Atlantis was submerged beneath the waves in a huge global cataclysm 9,000 years before the time of Solon. We know Solon, we know who he was. Solon was a famous Greek lawmaker. He was an ancestor of Plato, as a matter of fact, about 200 years before Plato. And around 600 BC, Solon, the great Greek lawmaker, made a visit to Egypt. And in Egypt, the priests at a temple of Sais in the Delta told him the story of Atlantis, and they said that it was written on the walls of the temple. And he said, when did this happen? When was this great civilization destroyed? And they said 9,000 years ago, and that was in 600 BC. So that's 9,600 BC in our calendar. That's 11,600 years ago. Plato is telling us a great civilization was destroyed in a global cataclysm of flood 11,600 years ago. He's laughed at by all academics and historians. But then geology comes along, and lo and behold, what do we find? 11,600 years ago is a truly cataclysmic episode in geological history. It's called Meltwater Pulse 1b. We have a massive rise in sea level as the ice sheets on North America and Northern Europe just crumble and collapse into the ocean. If Plato made the whole thing up, he was just astonishingly on the money with the latest geology. And I think that we really have to reconsider our attitudes to these stories that have come down to us from
of the lost continent of Atlantis, which healer and psychic Edgar Casey said would be located in the area.
Edgar Casey is arguably America's greatest psychic. He was born in 1877, died in 1945, and he has documented over 14,000 psychic readings What's interesting is that Casey also got into things like reincarnation. Some of Casey's clients were told that they had lifetimes in the so-called mythical civilization of Atlantis. In fact, Casey's reading said that the people of Atlantis as a whole had mass reincarnated as the people of America, and that America was, in a sense, a future life carryover of Atlantis.
Casey never lost his prophetic touch. In fact, another set of readings had emerged in the 1920s. Prophecies so astounding that they still echo today and may yet turn history on its head. For 43 years of his life, Edgar Casey would lie down on a couch, place his hands on his solar plexus, and fall into a self-induced trance. In this state, he traveled through space and time, foretelling wars, diagnosing illnesses, and in some of his most intriguing readings, rewriting history.
When we consider Edgar Casey's predictions, it's also interesting to look at some of the retrocognitive statements he made, looking back into history and making statements about things you wouldn't find in the history book.
The sleeping Casey seemed to know secrets about our past that only the most high-tech instruments and years of excavating could reveal. Long before the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1947, Casey spoke of an ancient sect of Judaism, the Essenes, which experts believed was made up exclusively of men.
Edgar Casey spoke about the Essenes as a community that included men, women, and children.
Experts remained dubious, but in the 1950s, years after Casey's death, archaeologists uncovered skeletons of Essene women near the site of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
With geology, there are some interesting things as well. Casey suggested that at one time the Nile River flowed in the opposite direction and actually emptied directly into the Atlantic Ocean.
Amazingly, in the 1980s, satellite images from the space shuttle revealed unknown river valleys beneath the driest parts of the Sahara. More imaging and on-site exploration revealed that the Nile may indeed have once flowed through the Sahara and into the Atlantic.
In Edgar Casey's lifetime, much of what he said about lost civilizations, ancient worlds, was regarded as science fiction. It really wasn't until this century, and literally the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, that people have begun to look much harder and realistically at these readings as perhaps, well, maybe these aren't so far-fetched.
Probably the most astounding historical readings Casey gave had to do with the lost land of Atlantis.
Atlantis, from Edgar Casey's perspective, was the first great Eden on the earth. It predates the Eden that we know of between the Tigris and the Euphrates, the Eden of Adam and Eve. Edgar Casey saw Atlantis as a massive continent in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. At the time, the individuals that populated the area had a deep understanding of the forces of the universe and could actually harness some of these powers to use devices such as flying machines and crystals and so forth.
But according to the readings, the Atlanteans abused their power over nature, and Atlantis disappeared in a cataclysmic disaster some 10,000 years ago. Casey's most specifically timed prophecy said portions of Atlantis would rise again in 1968. It did not. But that year, a strange formation known as the Bimini Road was discovered in the Bahamas.
Most geologists think it's beach rock. Beach rock is rock that fractures parallel to the shore. Well, this is parallel to the shore, but the end of it curves around in a kind of a J shape, so that's unusual.
No one has gathered any conclusive evidence yet that proves Atlantis lies beneath the Bahamas. But according to Casey, Bimini isn't our only link to the lost continent. Before the final destruction, he said, Atlanteans hid records of their earliest history in other locations.
One was in the Yucatan Peninsula. The other was off the right front paw of the Sphinx in Egypt.
In the early 1990s, Dr. Robert Schock, a professor of geology at Boston University, conducted geological and seismic surveys on the Sphinx.
I was not in the business to support Edgar Cayce or any other, I'll call him psychic or prophet. I really knew nothing about him other than his name.
Schock and his team were about to make an astounding discovery.
We were able to model what was underneath the Great Sphinx. We found under and in front of the left paw of the Sphinx what I believe is a major chamber, maybe up to 25 meters below the surface. Based on its regularity, it looks like it was human carved. And not only is it definitely there, but it seems to have something in it. The way it resonated, the way it ringed, seems to indicate there's something in the chamber.
Is it the Atlanteans' Hall of Records Cayce spoke of? No one has explored it further.
In the terrain and under the coastal waters of South America have led some to locate Atlantis in modern-day Amazonia, Bolivia, or off the coast of Cuba. But for an ancient maritime people to advance a naval attack on Athens from Cuba or Bolivia would not appear in the least feasible.
Cuba is one of a number of locations on planet Earth whose coastal waters have submerged the cities of a previous culture. The island of Malta famously has these deep tracks embedded in stone that lead something onto land that is now thousands of feet underwater. Off the coast of Yonaguni-jima in Japan and in the Gulf of Cambay off the coast of India, under 25 to 36 meters of water, scientists have discovered the remains of streetscapes and cityscapes that would have been above sea level no more recently than 10,000 years ago. So there's no shortage of evidence for a civilization long predating our own. So while these places are fascinating and certainly important because it tells us there's a huge gap in our knowledge of our ancestry and our ancient past, they're not Plato's Atlantis. They're just in the wrong place.
Plato's geographic clues have led some explorers to the coastal regions of Spain and northwest Africa. But what did the northwest African coastline look like 11.5 millennia ago, at the time of Atlantis? What tectonic shifts might have altered the lie of the land and the perimeter of the oceans? Plato's description of an earthquake and a tsunami certainly hint at a cataclysm of global proportions. Viewed from space, the western coast of Mauritania bears the unmistakable scars of an immense deluge. A wash of sand and silt has immersed a huge section of land spanning from the North Atlantic to the interior of what is now the Sahara Desert. Land that is now well above sea level was once underwater. Accordingly, the desert floor is scattered with the remains of marine animals, their skeletons and shells a testament to the land's oceanic past. Here in 2008, Natalis Rosen and George S. Alexander began to investigate an anomaly in the Mauritanian landscape, a structure within the Eye of Africa, the Richat structure. Concentric rims of land, alternating with deep troughs, correspond with the unusual shape of Atlantis. With the land lower or the sea level higher, the correlations with Atlantis become clearer. Other clues in Plato's text find correlations here. The white, red, and black stone, springs of salt water, and one of fresh water. The preponderance of elephant remains, mountains, rivers, and a plateau to the north. A landlock of prehistoric mud, silt, and sand between the structure and the waters of the Atlantic. Rosen and Alexander show that the scale of the Richat structure corresponds with the measurements Plato gave for the Atlantean capital. They show that the outer ring has a diameter of 23.5 kilometers. This matches the 127 stadia of Plato's texts. Critics suggest that this measurement doesn't take account of the full extent of the Richat structure, which appears to be significantly larger, 35 to 50 kilometers. Yet the structure is rimmed by mountains on the north side, landlocked by a morass of sand and silt, just as Plato had described. It's abutted by a plateau and extends to what may have been a passageway to the sea. All powerful correlations. But is Mauritania the right location? Plato's phrase, "beyond the pillars of Heracles," suggests a location beyond the known world. Even an underwater Mauritania would have been immediately adjacent to the northwest African mainland. Furthermore, the orientation of the Richat structure is not to the north and south, as Plato said, but to the southwest, and the abutting plain doesn't match the details given by Plato. Where is the evidence that an advanced civilization ever called this place home?
Under the coastal waters of Cuba, Malta, the Gulf of Cambay, the remains of the cities are still there. Streets, steps, buildings, temples, all present and visible even after 10,000 years under the sea. Wouldn't something similar remain, even if flattened and scattered, around the Richat structure? When we look at the timing of the demise of this previous civilization, of which Plato's Atlantis, if it existed, was a part, it corresponds with the timing of the most recent extinction-level event on planet Earth that we know of. Pioneering scientists like Richard Firestone of the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory and Albert Goodyear of the University of Southern Carolina, James Kennett at the University of California, really stuck their neck out with this thesis, but it's now part of a growing scientific consensus that our planet was indeed impacted by the exploding fragments of a massive asteroid, which 12,800 years ago obliterated the Clovis civilization on North America. It extincted 70% of that continent's megafauna. It would have triggered sky fires and tsunamis around the world, blanketing the planet in a pall of dust and ash and soot. What's known as the Clovis Comet plunged the northern half of planet Earth back into an ice age even more severe than the one we'd just been emerging from. And at that time, the future of humanity itself would have hung in the balance. So it isn't hard to conceive of an island nation experiencing seismic disturbances and then disappearing under the waves, just as Plato said of Atlantis. The impact of the Clovis Comet, its fragments, and the planetary changes that followed give an explanation of why coastal cities adjacent to Cuba, Malta, Japan, India are now under up to 36 meters of seawater.
We call this moment the Younger Dryas Cold period, a period whose effects continued until 11,600 years ago. A massive meteorite crater beneath the ice fields of Greenland's Hiawatha Glacier measures 31 kilometers in diameter and may correspond with the timing of the Younger Dryas. Extinctions of megafauna included woolly rhinos and mammoths, mastodons and saber-toothed tigers in North America and Europe, the giant sloth in South America, and enormous versions of buffalo, zebra and wildebeest on the African subcontinent. Might the Richat structure correspond with Plato's Atlantis? Or does its orientation and position misalign with Plato's description? Might its burial in salt and ocean sand have all been part of a wider cataclysm triggered by the Clovis Comet? With the absence of megalithic structures, and other questions unanswered, one has to ask, is it even in the right location?
Plato's phrase, placing Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Heracles, would more probably locate Atlantis somewhere in the mid-North Atlantic. Well, what has been found there that might give evidence that Atlantis was a real place? And why does it matter? If we now have evidence of ancient cities under seawater all around the world, and it's incontrovertible that there was a previous civilization, previous cultures that we really don't know very much about.
So I just want to state what I got out of doing my own studies and just out of everything. So 24,000 years ago, a flood happened on this planet. Globally, in certain parts of humanity lived. And then 15,000 years later, when humanity started to build back up and build consciousness back up, that Ra and others came on this planet to teach us, which is where our so-called myths came from. But other beings came to teach us about serious beings, about beings from the water, about all of this. I think this is where our myths come from. So again, Ra says this. It says that we as a group, or what you would call a social memory complex, made contact with the race of your planetary kind, which you call Egyptians. Others from our density made contact at the same time in South America and the so-called lost cities with their attempts to contribute the law of one. So it's saying at this same time, that other beings from a realm where rise from came to help humanity. But that is not to say that other beings from other densities did not come here to aid or possibly do other things to humanity. Or spirits or beings, whatever we're going to call them, but it's not to say that. So they came to transmit the law of one, So this is a possible genesis. So we're not going to say that nobody's wrong. We're not here to make nobody wrong. We're here to understand. So a lot of the Christians believe humanity started 6,000 years ago. So with their myth, if they can take it as a myth and really be open to some more understanding, their myth may have meant to say that humanity started over 10,000 years ago. But not really account for the space between the actual floods and humanity coming back up in that time. So we've established a possible flood. We've got an understanding for what an ark could be and for what Noah is and know. Oh, but before we get anywhere else, we gotta try to see about this 24,000 year cycle. Because if we don't have that, then our story is off. So if we can't prove that or see if it can be proven, then we got another book of half-truth that we can't move forward with. And we lost again because the other book left us lost and confused, and we know it's not real history. So if this book starts to give us some bullshit, then, so let's move forward and let's see if we got anything with the 24,000 year cycle. Because if that's the case, if we got a 24,000 year cycle, you need to understand that at the end of the day, this could be the end of the day. This is 24,000 years later. So if this cycle is real, then we are here again, my friends. So we need to see if this is real because this is a drastic thing. This is not a little thing. This is not a small conversation. This is not the type of shit you hear and go turn back on your TV. This is the type of shit you hear and transform your life because if we had a 24,000 year cycle, that means something. And we can't deny that because if we're going to move forward, then we got to move forward in truth. We don't want to be just smacked around by something. So, let's see.
The Earth's axis points at the North Star, and the heavens have been revolving around that star since the dawn of time. Except they haven't. When the Egyptians built the pyramids, the North Star wasn't our current North Star, Polaris. No, it was Thuban. Why did it change? It's because the Earth's axis is moving. This motion was first discovered by Hipparchus. He was looking at the positions of the stars and comparing them with their positions a century earlier at the same time of year. He found that the stars were moving at least 1 degree every century. What could be causing this motion? When you're riding a car and the car turns, you feel an acceleration. In the same way that you experience an acceleration when a car turns, there is also an acceleration as the world turns.
This acceleration works against the force of gravity. So you actually weigh less at the equator.
And you weigh more when you're at the North Pole. 1% more.
This also causes the Earth to bulge. The Earth is 26 miles wider at the equator.
Because the Earth is not a perfect sphere, the gravitational force of the Sun isn't perfectly balanced. One side of the Earth gets tugged just a little bit more, and this causes the Earth's axis to spin, completing one revolution every 26,000 years.
Hello, I'm going to explain what precession of the equinoxes is. I have made many videos on astronomy, also on the tropical versus sidereal zodiac, also on the astrological ages, and in some of these videos I refer to precession of the equinoxes because it's involved in all of these things. And some of you are still a little unclear about exactly how precession of the equinoxes happens. So I'm making this video just about precession of the equinoxes to make it very clear. And to understand what precession of the equinoxes is, it helps to put it into perspective. That the Earth has 3 kinds of motion. Number 1, you already know that the Earth spins on its axis once a day, and this creates night and day. You also know that the Earth revolves around the sun once a year, and this makes the 4 seasons. What some people are not aware of is that there's a third motion of the Earth, which is that the Earth wobbles. It wobbles every 26,000 years. And because it's such a huge amount of time relative to our lifetimes, the effect of it is not so obvious and we don't think about it as much. But there are these 3 kinds of motion. And it's this third motion, the wobble of the Earth, that makes precession of the equinoxes, and it's involved in things like the tropical versus sidereal zodiac, and also this idea of astrological ages.
In 1894, Swami Sri Yukteswar, a great Hindu sage, described our solar system and the Great Cycle.
We learn from Oriental astronomy that the moons revolve around the planets, and the planets turning on their axis revolve with their moons around the sun. The sun, with its planets and the moons, takes some star for its jewel and revolves around it in about 24,000 years of our Earth, a celestial phenomenon which causes the backward movement of the equinoctial points around the zodiac.
The theory, the binary, is that our sun is rotating around another sun. And that, of course, the whole thing, the system, what you might say, is also rotating around what they call the grand central sun.
Could it be that the ancient knowledge of this dual sun was lost during our descent into the dark ages of the Kali Yuga, just as we lost our knowledge of the heliocentric system? And as we now ascend toward the golden age once more, will science rediscover this binary companion? As we look deeper into the universe and expand our knowledge of its motion, we've come to realize that single suns are more the exception than the rule.
Roughly half of the stars you find in the universe are alone, and the other half are in groups, and often the groups consist of two, and if that is a group of two, then we talk about binary stars. But it can also be 3, 4, 5. There's no limit on that.
Binaries, it seems to be the common observation in the cosmos now. Most of them are actually binary systems.
With so many binaries in the heavens, why wouldn't our sun have a partner? Then again, if it did, wouldn't we be able to see it by now with our high-tech observatories or the Hubble Space Telescope? While there might not be a visible companion, it doesn't mean one's not there. Some stars can't be seen at all, such as black holes or old neutron stars, and others, like brown dwarfs, are barely detectable. Also, the long orbit period of 24,000 years will make the connection of our sun to a binary partner extremely difficult to detect. One sign we'd expect to see would be the changes in the sun's rate of movement. In a binary system, orbital speed is not constant, and theorists say it would cause changes in the precession rate.
As soon as two celestial bodies orbit each other, according to Kepler's laws, you have elliptical orbits. And if you have that, you have where when the bodies are closer to each other, they tend to be faster, and then as the other object moves further away, it gets slower and in again.
If the current rate of speed were constant, a complete binary cycle would take almost 26,000 years. The scientists have confirmed that the rate of precession is increasing. In a binary system, this would mean that two stars are moving closer together, and the cycle would take much less than 26,000 years.
Analysis of the data has shown that it is actually closer to a 24,000-year period. If we keep observing, if we make future measurements, that would indicate certainly that we are in a binary system.
The cycle of a binary system might also be observed in the geological record. Mathematician Milutin Milankovitch noticed the Earth has had global warming and cooling cycles that roughly correlate to the length of the Great Year. Just as the binary model answers questions of the past, it could also be applied to solve scientific questions of the present. For example, at the edge of our solar system is a field of asteroids known as the Kuiper Belt. In 2001, a team of scientists from the University of Michigan made a startling discovery. The asteroids appear to end very abruptly. A sheer edge like this would be expected in a binary system. Also, a large number of long-cycle comets in our solar system come from a very small part of the sky. Although some astronomers like John Matisse and Daniel Whitmire think it may result from the gravitational pull of an unconfirmed 10th planet, our sun's binary could also have this effect. Another enigma. All celestial bodies have angular momentum, a force that corresponds to their mass and motion. Yet in our solar system, angular momentum is unevenly distributed. The sun has 99.9% of the total mass, only 1% of the total angular momentum. If we acknowledge that our sun is curving through space in a 24,000-year binary orbit, we find the sun's angular momentum was there all the time, but primarily in its orbital motion, not just in its spin. Although the possibility of a binary star agrees with many observed facts, it does raise questions. Where is it? How do we find it? The most common objection is, if we were in a binary system, we would know it by now. But we may be looking for something that is very far away and very hard to see.
One of the stars might have evolved enough so that it has died and has become a white dwarf and then lost a lot of its heat and became faint as well. Or it might have been a wannabe star who just was born as a brown dwarf and never became a real star and is too dark for this. But if it's sufficiently far away and sufficiently faint, then it would just sit there and maybe orbit the sun within a few thousand years. Who knows? I cannot have any positive opinion about this, but I would not rule it out.
Perhaps we've already seen our sun's binary companion, but clinging to old theories kept us from realizing it. If so, it would not be the first time that new knowledge was met with resistance. An Earth-centered solar system was undeniable fact until Copernicus realized that another reference frame was at work. The Earth itself was moving. And Einstein denied the existence of black holes, even though his theories predicted them.
People also believed in the flat Earth, and it kept for long periods of time. It's just it's a thought that is embedded, so deeply embedded, that we just don't see the other world. That we do not see an alternative. That we might see a phenomena, but we don't see the reality of it.
It may be that still another reference frame is at work. The solar system could be curving, producing the change in orientation we call precession, and just maybe ushering us into a higher age. And so we continue our quest for the truth, using new technologies to see much fainter and more distant objects in space. Astronomers at the University of Hawaii have now detected a very faint brown dwarf companion to a nearby star. And recently, scientists detected a Kuiper belt object more than half the diameter of Pluto. It is likely, but just at the beginning of a string of such discoveries.
If it can be proven that our sun is indeed in a binary system, that would certainly shed some new light on the knowledge and the wisdom that ancient civilization had.
They understand the rules and the laws by which we human beings are here on Earth, and they understand that we're here for a particular purpose. We're not accidental glitches in a meaningless universe.
I think the proof will come. We just haven't got to the point where we're able to figure it out yet.
New discoveries in astronomy and archaeology are adding more and more to our understanding of the true depth of our own history. If we continue these pursuits, perhaps we will prove the link between binary motion, precession, and man's place in the great year.
There's going to be changes that are coming that are going to be mind-boggling to humanity.
History reveals that ancient cultures around the globe were aware of a great cycle that connected the movements of the heavens and life on Earth. The great year tracked not only time, but perhaps we will find the very rise and fall of civilization itself.
Casey was a cataclysmist, and in his readings, he was constantly talking about earth changes and pole shifts that caused civilizations to be destroyed in ancient times. And Casey said that we were going to have another pole shift around the time of the millennium.
Even a relatively small asteroid coming in at the right angle, not necessarily hitting Earth, but sort of grazing the Earth, could theoretically change the tilt axis of the Earth significantly. Now, if that occurred, land and ocean would redistribute on the Earth.
It seems as if history repeats itself. And it may be that at this moment, we are exactly in the same situation that the citizens of Atlantis were in.
Perhaps we will find out exactly what had happened to this lost civilization and learn from their mistakes and not sink into oblivion ourselves.
So, it seems like we have a case for the 24,000 years or 26,000 years. But it seems like we sped it up if it is true, or it just is 24,000 years. So far in our New Genesis story, although we haven't talked about human origins or anything like that, but saying that we just in our basically the 7th generation of humanity. So now we have a case for this. Then that means that it's possible that we up in this cycle. So as we continue this conversation, I want to continue it in the realm of science. So this is a book called The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight. I just want to read a little bit of this. This is science. And then I'll get back to, our other part of the conversation. But let's dip into some science. Talking about runaway climate change. Runaway climate change doesn't really look like a hockey stick graph on economic analysis showing massive losses. Those are just representations of what runaway climate change really looks like. Runaway climate change looks like the 4.8 Syrian refugees and 6.5 million people displaced within Syria who are desperate to survive and desperate for stability. It looks like dead oceans deprived of oxygen, deserted coastal communities, out-of-work fishermen, and barren, bleached coral reefs. Runaway climate change looks like desert villages, fields of crops that won't grow, and droughts that cause millions to grow hungry, like we're already seeing in Zimbabwe and in India. Reaching the tipping point means a constant state of global instability and never-ending resource wars. It means that, at a minimum, 1.8 billion people at risk of starvation, of water scarcity, of civil wars and forced migration. By 2050, according to the World Bank, it means increased violence as climate refugees desperately flee to places where they might be able to survive and countries struggle to keep their borders secure. Before I close on this book, The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, I want to read this beginning chapter. It starts off with a quote from a man named Douglas MacArthur. I guess it was said on September 2nd, 1945. He was born 1880. He lived until 1964. The quote reads, "We have had our last chance. If we do not devise some greater and more equitable system, Armageddon will be at our door." He said that in 1945. In 1945. 1945, man. Listen to this. This is up to date. Now we're talking about 2021, 2020. We're talking about our time. We're talking about, and this was written, this book came out years ago. We got to get this right, because this did come out years ago. What's the first print? Wow. We got 1998, this first print. This don't even make no sense. Last print, 2018. This don't even make no sense. This book was also recommended in Conversations with God. That's why I bought this book. Because in Conversations with God, the voice of God in that book said that he helped put this together to try to wake humanity up. Well, the voice of God did. We don't want to say he. In the last 24 hours since this time yesterday, over 200,000 acres of rainforest have been destroyed in our world. Fully 13 million tons of toxic chemicals have been released into our environment. Over 21,000 people have died of starvation, 16,000 of them children, and more than 150 plant or animal species have been driven to extinction by the actions of humans. The last time there was such a rapid loss of species was when the dinosaurs vanished. That's something thing that happened where they said that certain thing came out of the sky. But if you read certain or look into certain places spiritually, you'll see that the dinosaurs had to be removed from the planet because there was not a world that could exist where humanity and dinosaurs and humanity progressed. There was not a world that could exist. Some of them, the more highly evolved of their species, was transported to other planets. And then we have this happening again, something coming out the sky, out of nowhere, because Atlantis almost destroyed our planet. Because they were a high civilization, and they did have weapons of mass destruction. According to the World Resource Institute 2000 report palette analysis, half of the world's wetlands have vanished in the past century. Half of the planet's forests are gone. 80% of grasslands and 40% of the planet's land surface suffer from soil degeneration, and 70% of the planet's major marine fisheries are depleted. They add the world's freshwater systems are so degraded, their ability to support human life, plant, and animal life is greatly in peril. We in the modern world most often go through our lives concerned with the day-to-day issues of making a living and hanging on to our particular lifestyle. Occasionally, we'll listen a bit more closely, look a bit more deeply, and can find often with little effort voices of doom about the future, ranging from the reasonable to the unlikely. That was science.